Just by way of housekeeping and making sure that our webcasting is working. On the first point, we'll just ask that if you have any side conversations that you wish to have, if you could take those to the back of the room or the foyer, we'd appreciate that so as not to disrupt other presentations and others engaged in the public meeting. Secondly, if I could ask for those who are listening to us remotely via the web, if you could send a note just confirming that you can hear us. We're trying to ensure that our web protocol is working effectively. So ground control to Major Tom, and if you could let us know, that would be most helpful. Lastly, our apologies. Director Mortensen was called away unexpectedly this morning, and so I'll be leading the public meeting. Just real quick for those of you who follow, both the Assembly and the Senate budget subcommittees have approved our budget change proposals for the 13-14 budget year. We're very happy about that. Now comes the hard work, putting those proposals in place, including our beverage container recycling program changes. And I think Jose Ortiz will speak to kind of the next steps on some of that during his presentation. Secondly, the May revision was released, and the governor's priorities relative to the May revision were crystal clear. K through 12 education and healthcare were the top priorities. And so, you know, the commitment of $1 billion in K-12 for establishing Common Core standards and implementing that and providing training to teachers is a huge investment, clearly a priority for the administration. Now, relative to the cap and trade money, which all of you were following the draft investment plan, and there was some thought that that money would make it in. While none of that funding has materialized in the budget for any environmental programs, for those of you who weren't following, the cap and trade investment dollars will be loaned to the general fund and ultimately used when you know, the governor has really come to terms with the type of programs and policies he wants to move forward. However, none of that takes away from the organics work that many of you in this room have been engaged in. None of that takes away from where we're trying to go with our organics policy. But at this point in time, the May revision does not reflect any cap and trade money for organics. As many of you know, your vested interests are heard across the street, and there is a platform over there for you to have your advocacy and express your interests in the issue. With that, I'm going to ask Graciela Castillo to come up and provide a little bit of a sort of legislative update on some of the key bills that we're following.
Is that better? Yes. Well, good morning. For you guys who are looking and following legislative process, next week, actually the next 2 weeks are going to be very exciting times. At least I will be up and paying attention to what's going on in the Dome, so I'm very excited. So I would encourage all of you guys, next week it will be just floor session. So for anybody who has a couple of minutes to spare, grab a couple of bags of chips or popcorn, turn on the Cal channel, and follow floor session. But before we get to floor session, two big policy committee, or actually fiscal committees, are meeting this week. Assembly Appropriations will have its final hearing on the 24th. They will also be dealing with the suspense file. And over in the Senate, they're going to have their hearing May 23rd. A couple of the bills that we're following, and again, it's very hard right now to determine what's actually going to be come out of the committees. But a couple of the bills that we're watching are 1126 Gordon, AB 1001, and one of the big priorities for us is AB 323, which is the organics policy, something that we are watching very closely. It's one of the top priorities for the department. And over in the Senate, we also have the plastic bags. We have the fast food recycling of containers. And then a couple of the bills that unfortunately have become two-year bills, they are not dead. They are basically are not moving this year, but we're going to continue to watch them, and they will kind of come back in January. Our AB 403 Stone, which was creating an EPR program for home-generated sharps, and SB 727 by Jackson, which would also have created an EPR program for pharmaceutical drugs. Again, those bills are not dead. The authors are working on amendments and trying to make them work, and we will see them again next session. So stay tuned for June's update. I will then have a list of what actually survived.
Very good. Thank you, Graciela. At this point, we'll move to any public comment. If anyone wants to speak on any major issues concerned to the department. No? Absent that, then I think we'll move to Mr. DeBee. Forgive me, Scott, did you have anything? No, thank you. So we'll move to Mark DeBee on item C, solid waste facilities.
Thank you, Ken. Usually Sue Markey makes this report, but she's not available today, so it falls to me. Most of the permits, solid waste facility permits that we have listed on the agenda are carryovers. We're not yet completed the staff's work on these permits. So as you can see by some of the dates, they need to be acted on in the very near future. So we continue to report on them until they're completed. So with that, I wanted to indicate that there has been a date change relative to when the action is required on the San Timoteo, and I knew I would mess that up, sanitary landfill in San Bernardino. It had been expected that we were to act by the 24th, but there had been some minor edits to the permit, and so it was resubmitted, and that restarted the time frame for us to act. So it is now June 18th, which would be the date that we're required to act on that permit. The Oasis Sanitary Landfill is a permit modification that needs action by the 4th of June. Sierra Waste Recycling Transfer Station was mentioned last month. It wasn't actually in print on the agenda last month. This will be a modification to the permit to increase the vehicle counts. Currently, there's a cap on the number of vehicles at 150 vehicles per day. The new finding or condition in the permit will indicate that 450 passenger car equivalents would be allowed at the facility per day. The tonnage is not changing. Staff have received a couple correspondence relative to this permit, relative to the vehicle counts, as well as some other issues that were brought up. And staff continues to evaluate both the site and the permit package relative to that. Folks may be aware too that there was a fire at this facility in the last week or so, and by all accounts so far that I've heard, the news reports made it look much larger than it was in reality. So there's very little damage, and only one small portion of the material on site was affected. But again, as I say, staff continue to evaluate both the site and the permit package relative to Sierra Waste, and we have till the 10th of June to act on that permit. Carryover from last month is Tulare Anaerobic Co-Digestion Facility in Tulare County, and the West Valley Materials Recovery Facility in San Bernardino. We have received 2 more permits since the agenda went to print, and one of them is for the Recology Hay Road facility in Solano County. It's a revised solid waste facility permit. Action is going to be required by July 13th. The proposed revision would allow for the change in daily disposal tonnage from 1,200 tons per day average over 7 days, with a 2,400 ton disposal peak, to 2,400 daily disposal peak with no average. The increase, there would also be an increase in the maximum permitted daily vehicle trips from 500 vehicle trips per day, averaged over 7 days, with a 600 vehicle peak to change to 620 vehicle per day average with no peak. Hope that's clear. Sort of associated with the Hay Road facility is a facility that's basically within the boundary of the landfill, and that's Jepson Prairie Organic Composting Facility, but it operates under its own separate permit. And that permit's also going to be revised and will change the vehicle counts in a very similar way to that of the landfill. I hesitate because I have an additional item that I need to share, and that is relative to what's referred to is a stipulated agreement for a temporary emergency. So if you can bear with me, I'll make this report. This is an obligation in statute to report on when LEAs issue these agreements. So in accordance with Title 14, Section 17211.9, reporting on a stipulated agreement for the Oasis Sanitary Landfill Facility number 33-AA-0015 that was issued on April 29th, 2013. It was then amended on May 9th, 2013. It was issued by the LEA for Riverside County within the Department of Environmental Health. The LEA determined that there was an unforeseen circumstance relative to the need to remove material from Cal Biomass, a composting facility within the LEA's jurisdiction, that was determined to be the equivalent to the definition of a temporary emergency in the regulation. The material was to be removed and taken to the Oasis landfill. The rate at which the material was to be received at Oasis would put Oasis in violation of their permit, thus prompting the need for the temporary waiver. So the temporary waiver extended the days of operation from what was currently allowed in the permit of 2 days per week to 6 days per week, and then allowed a temporary increase in tonnage from 450 tons per day to 2,100 tons per day. The terms of the stipulated agreement cannot exceed over 60 days, so it started in April 29th and it will conclude on June 27th. The material received at the landfill is to be primarily used as alternative daily cover or other beneficial uses at the landfill. It will be handled in accordance with all of the handling storage requirements currently in place, as well as all the state minimum standards. Some of the material may need to be landfilled and as disposed. The operator is required to submit weekly progress reports to the LEA, indicating if the project is on target and if there are any significant problems encountered with the project. So that meets the mandate to disclose and make known the stipulated agreement information. So I'll conclude at that time. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Mark. Do we have any questions for Mr. DeBee on his portion of the agenda? No. All right. Well, thank you again, Mark. Moving on, Jose?
Yes.
Program?
As Mr. DeRosa mentioned, the spring finance letter has been approved by both houses of the legislature at this point in time. We've got to wait for the governor's signature on the actual bill so that we can start implementing our spring finance letter as of July 1st of this year. I'm not going to go into the individual components of the spring finance letter. It does contain about 6 different programmatic focuses that we need to make sure that we can deliver on. We're currently having a number of conversations regarding operational planning of the rollout. the resource requirements as we go from one month to the next, how we are going to provide for training along the way, how we're going to engage on the regulations front so that we can have a very clear and level playing field for all of the program participants. And all of that to try to get to the one thing for which we have a solid deadline, which is required DORIS usage within the community as of January 1st of 2014. All of that we intend to bring to future meetings here. So we're going to use the monthly public meeting venue in order to present, and we're still talking about the particulars about how we can most effectively do this, but it'll be probably some kind of a red light, yellow light, green light matrix of our activities and our status on each of those activities, with the thought being that that's probably the best way to communicate to people broadly how we're doing on each of the elements that we have moving forward. So there's a lot to do. We want to make sure that we're keeping folks appropriately informed. Where there are going to be workshops that we need to sponsor, we also want to try to make use of the full public meeting day. So we're actually asking the director and Mr. DeRosa to consider allowing us make use of this room in future months, in order that if we have a regulations package that we need to discuss, if it's a surprise that's come out of left field that we need to address in some fashion, we'd be taking advantage of the afternoon more than likely in order to make sure that we can have an informed conversation with all the program stakeholders. So that, in a nutshell, is where we're at. I expect that we're going to come back next month with more specificity about where we are, and hopefully there'll be a, I'm not expecting that there'll be a signed budget act at that point in time, but we'll be a whole lot closer to where we know that we need to be. Hopefully that includes some advertisements as well to fill some vacancies, so that we've done all the interviewing, gotten everything in place, and all that's required is for people to show up on July 1st for their first day at work. With that, unless there are any questions, I will move to the informational items that are on the agenda. So any questions regarding what we're doing with the spring finance letter at this point in time, and maybe some of the steps to keep everyone informed? Doesn't look like it. So on that basis, I'm going to ask, first of all, Mike Miller to come up. Mike's got a number of informational items that he's going to present, and then we've got a couple of other managers that will present on a couple of other items, and I'll ask them to introduce themselves when they come up. Mike?
Thank you, Jose. Good morning. My name is Mike Miller, and I'm the manager of the operations branch, and I have the opportunity today to go over 3 items. We are trying to make these public meetings more informational for you, so we're going to start covering a lot of the items in DOR that are of interest that we know. We make a lot of payments to people. The first thing on my list is the quarterly report. The whole purpose behind me giving the update is to let you know if there's any big changes. Well, this April report that was recently released, there is a big change. We were, in January's report, we were predicting that proportional reduction would happen for fiscal year 15-16. Based upon the current projections, that date has moved back to March of 15. So you're kind of being put on notice right now that we are looking at implementing proportional reductions beginning July 1, 2014. So what this means is that at some percentage we're going to be reducing the amount of 14,581 payments so that we can make sure that we can balance the fund and have operating monies to last through the year. For the 15 year, that would mean that proportional reductions would be approximately 100%. Now this is all contingent based upon what we forecast in our revenues. What we're seeing is the recycling rate, the number of beverage containers returned, is going up, and the sales are kind of remaining flat or slightly declining. So what happened? What caused this change? Well, there was some legislation that moved the reporting period for distributors from 60 days to 30 days. We knew it was coming, so we forecast what that one-time bump of money would be, and our forecast was off by $35 million. In other words, we got $35 million more than we anticipated when we forecasted how much money we would get in. So without knowing the true cause for what happened, we have to wait the months to see how the revenue is actually holding up. Does that $35 million actually hold up? And it's not. So just be aware revenue is flattening and slightly declining. So the department will be making moves right now, planning. It has to happen about 180 days prior to the period, so just be aware of that. All of our program reform activities that we're working on are designed to help, minimize this problem, and we're doing everything with the spring finance letter. We're hoping we're getting some cost relief there, so just be aware. Are there any questions on the quarterly report?
I do have a couple. When is the next report?
The next
scheduled to
report
be
is in
released?
July.
Okay, so there's an opportunity to really closely examine that trend and
That
see
trend-
if the assumptions are
Correct.
bearing out. The September 15 to March 15 change and the proportional reductions, is it accurate to say that proportional reductions happen absent other programmatic changes to help resolve the structural deficit? I think that's a critical point to emphasize. All things being equal, everything staying the way it is right now, proportional reductions happen.
Correct.
But if there are programmatic changes, those would be calculated within, and the implications of that would be figured out. Okay, thanks.
Yes. So anything that happens in statute, legislation, anything that is passed will change all of those assumptions. It's important that when we put out the quarterly report that you read it, we've made it much more what we call user-friendly and transparent, so that individuals, right there, if you look in this summary, it describes what I just described here.
Thank you, Mike.
All of our numbers, of course, are forecasts, and we do the best we can in our crystal ball, but we'll see what happens. So, are there any questions from the audience? Yes.
John Cups, independent consultant. What effect or impact would successful implementation of all of the, reform efforts outlined or set forth in the finance letter have in terms of the impact as far as proportional reductions?
The spring finance letter actually has a lot of data included within the document. We're committing to more metrics than the program has previously had, so that we can capture, in fact, what's going on over time. We try to quantify, and we indicated that coming to some estimate of the cost avoidance that all of these activities imply is very difficult to calculate. And we didn't want to commit to any one number on that basis. We think that collectively it'll have an impact that'll be in the millions of dollars, but just how much that would be, we don't know. We want to get some experience with implementing the program first. And a lot of that is also dependent on when we get the regulations in place to actually allow us to implement the various elements of the proposal. On the one element of the proposal that does indicate a savings number, we provide a range of from $3 to $8 million as to what we would save in going from a commingled rate at buyback centers to a segregated rate. I've seen other numbers from the stakeholders that indicate that that number is very conservative, that the savings there could be tens of millions of dollars more. But even if we assume that that's going to be in the ballpark of what we've seen from others, and we add on some other element of cost avoidance, does that allow us to avoid the proportional reductions in the 2014-15 fiscal year? Right now, I don't think so. So, as Mike and Ken are alluding to, we have to do our due diligence and make sure that we've got options that are under development, that if in future quarterly reports we continue to see that the trends are we're out of cash, we'll be able to act quickly enough to either we're acting on the basis of current law and getting into proportional reductions, or we're implementing some new measures that have been passed in statute. But every quarterly report from here on out becomes vital for us, so we're doing the best that we can to get the information that we need to improve the projections.
And to sort of amplify on Jose's point, the finance letter, the proposal was never presented as a panacea. I think we've been pretty clear that this is step one in what we know to be several steps going forward. We knew and we were clear that this was not going to be the thing that fixed the structural deficit, but it set a foundation upon which we will now continue to build the program, really professionalizing the industry, increasing the certification requirements, and we will move forward from that and build upon it. So we will get to, as our best effort, to get to resolving that structural deficit. But this is just step one. So thank you for your question, John.
Well, I guess I have a follow-up then. Where is the department in terms of other potential reforms going beyond this so-called step one that would have a significant impact in terms of resolving the budget deficit projections without implementing the proportional cuts?
Yeah, the next round of budget proposals, that are submitted to, the governor for consideration happen in September and October. Staff right now are working on options and exploring ideas to sort of address those next steps and to get our hands around the structural deficit. So we anticipate, all things going according to plan, that the 14-15 budget will include additional proposals to address this. And those that are not budget related, we may have to enter into in the policy arena through legislation.
Can I add one more little context around that to help kind of frame this, at least from the financial guy's perspective? We have about $100 million annual deficit a year, so roughly every $10 million we save gets us a month further away from proportional reduction. So if we increase revenue by 10 million or we decrease expenses by 10 million, it basically gets us a month. So we have a ways to go to make up for that $100 million. So if there's no more questions, then I'm going to move on to my next item, which is plastic market development. And I see some faces in here that were at our workshop last week on Thursday. It was a very lively and somewhat contentious workshop. Jose sat through the entire, 6 or 7 hours worth of work on how we're going to deal with the $10 million. So I'm going to give you an update. Last year in 2012, the department had spent $20.6 million on supporting the washing, cleaning, flaking, pelletizing, and making into products, plastic products in California. And we pretty much spent the entire $20.6 million. Our annual budget for this is $10 million. So for 2013, we have a $10 million allocation. And we met with participants to try to come up with how are we actually going to pay this, because in the first quarter, we got enough applications to pretty much use the entire $10 million in one quarter. So we met Thursday, and we finally reached somewhat of a consensus late in the afternoon that for 2013, we're going to go ahead and pay the maximum rate for plastic market development at $150 a ton until it's gone, which will be gone in the first quarter. And then for 2014, we're going to prorate the $10 million to $2.5 million each quarter. And then we will reduce the ton payout depending on how many applications that we get in. Right now, the department is allowed to pay up to $150 a ton, but we may get applications that come in that overspend our 2.5 allocation, so we reduce the amount that we pay per participant by ton so that we can distribute the money. That was pretty much the consensus, and so there are other issues in there that we're going to have to resolve that came out of this, and we're going to be developing, my group is going to be developing a policy paper for Carol, Ken, and Jose to sit down and discuss on how we actually distribute the $2.5 million between program types. So are there any questions on plastic market development? No? Okay. Next one, biannual report. Well, the biannual report is a requirement the department has from the legislature to produce twice a year, basically, what are the recycling rates in California. Some of you read it. Most of you probably don't. But I'm going to try to get here and promote this report to go out there and take a look because there's a lot of good, interesting information out there. One of the things that you should note is the last biannual report and this biannual report, we're starting to include some greenhouse gas and some other, what we would consider the 75% goal marketing and activities that we're doing, not marketing, but the activities that we're doing in the 75%. So you'll see us starting to merge more with what the department is doing on our biannual report. The other thing that you'll note is our recycling rate has remained overall at 82% for the last 3 years running. So this is for calendar year 2012. We are at an 82% rate. Our forecast shows that's going to climb this year, so we'll see what the actual numbers come up and do and say. What we also notice in the report is that you'll see some wide diversity. We take the data twice a year, and it really shows seasonality. So when you look at the numbers based on 6-month period, you'll see a really low recycling rate during the winter months and a really high recycling rate during the summer months, which everybody would expect to see that. And so the numbers in this report actually show that. So the overall rate is 82%. One item that's always on the hot list for everybody is HDPE. Last year was at 104%. And this year it's running at 91%. Now, so I always have to do kind of an explanation of what the heck happens with HDPE. So I put it in context. It's a pretty small fraction of the actual fund itself, but there's a lot of different kinds of containers in HDPE, and very little of it is CRV. And so what we're actually measuring is CRV. Part of the spring finance letter has we're only going to be paying the segregated rate at recycling centers. If you look at HDPE and you buy a load of HDPE commingled, which means you mix CRV and non-CRV materials together, we have a rate for that we pay out. And so we could be purchasing in our commingled rate way more CRV containers than are actually in the load. And so when you run the numbers of the tonnage come through and the number of tons sold, it's pure math, that's how you can get over that 100%. And otherwise, that commingled rate, when we pay segregated only in plastic hits, I would expect to see our plastics start to come in line, and those fluctuations for HDPE won't be as big. So, are there any questions on the biannual report? Nope. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. And we've got another presentation on a set of regulations. And in fact, the next 2 presentations will be on a couple of regulations.
Good morning. My name is George Donko, Manager of Recycling Program Certification and Registration Branch. I have one item, number 4 on the agenda. It's a new reporting requirement that applies to some of our beverage manufacturers and distributors. I also like to make a clarification when I make this presentation. Essentially, beginning this year and every year on June 30th, beverage manufacturers and distributors that have entered into agreement with another beverage manufacturer or distributor to report on their behalf have to provide us a list of all these agreements. What I need to clarify is that if I, George Donko, make an agreement with Pepsi that I'm going to distribute their product, I have to report to CalRecycle within 20 days that I have this agreement with Pepsi. If in the course of the year I make another agreement with Coke, again I have to report within 20 days that I have this agreement with Coke. On the 30th of June of every year, I have to provide a listing to CalRecycle of all those agreements. The one I have with Coke, Pepsi, 7-Up, whoever I do have an agreement, I have to provide that list. So I need to make it clear that I have to provide the list. Coke doesn't have to provide the list. I made the agreement with Coke. I have to provide a list of all those people that I've made the agreements with. Just wanted to make that clear. Are there any questions?
I will add to this particular item on the agenda that it is something that the BSA in the 2010 audit originally
That's
looked
the
at.
Bureau of State Audits, for those who aren't as steeped in acronyms.
Thank you, Ken. The Bureau of State Audits in its 2010 report highlighted that we weren't doing the tracking that maybe we needed to do in order to make sure that we were collecting every possible penny that was due to the department. And so this is another mechanism that will, over time, we think, help us generate some additional monies into the fund. And pretty much all the regulations that are underway at this point in time, in some way or another, either contribute to revenue generation or to cost avoidance. So we're trying to make sure that they're put in place and put in place effectively. So anyone that's in fact impacted by this, we ask you, please do as the regulations require and report accordingly. Thank you, George.
Thank you.
Mr. Reed.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm here to represent item number 5. On May 3rd, the Office of Administrative Law published the notice of proposed rulemaking for the Recycling Center daily load limits, proposed regulations. Written comments are to be filed with the department by June 17th, 5 p.m. The regulations are to reduce daily allowable consumer load limits for plastic and aluminum from 500 pounds to 100 pounds, and for glass from 2,500 pounds to 1,000 pounds. To have your comments responded to in the formal record, it has to be in writing and submitted. There are multiple supporting documentations on the department's website that are accessible in a notice, and please feel free to call if you have any questions concerning that. And does anybody have questions about the daily load limits? Yeah. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Jose, anything further from your program?
Not at this time, but we'll be back next month.
Okay, look forward to that. While there's nothing listed under the e-waste item of our agenda, I understand from Howard that we do have a brief update relative to e-waste, so we'll go ahead and take that at this time.
Thank you, Ken. Good morning, everybody. My name is Andrew Hurst. I'm a supervisor in the CalRecycle Covered Electronic Waste Payment System program, and wanted to present to you on 3 items this morning. Impending revocation of participants for failure to submit net cost reports, program engagement at a national level regarding CRT glass markets, and anticipated stakeholder meeting in June of this year. So despite multiple notifications before and after the March 1st reporting deadline for the net cost report, we have 70 collectors who failed to report and 4 dual entities or recyclers that failed to report. Many of those are what we characterize as dead wood in the program that aren't actively participating in the program, so may not have much impact on them. Others are actively engaged in collection activities and will see a disruption in how the material flows, at least how the paperwork flows. The material may continue to flow the same way. This step, failure to report is a prohibited activity, and that may result in the revocation. So those steps will be taking place in the next few weeks to notify those folks. On the national front, the e-waste program staff have been engaging in and continue to participate. Actually, that's why Jeff's not here making this presentation now. In conference calls regarding CRT glass management and CRT markets throughout the nation. Perhaps you've seen reports on the national level about stockpiling of glass. We believe here in California the combination of DTSC universal waste rules that limit accumulations, an active inspection and enforcement effort, and the shipping requirements in the CalRecycle payment system, that we don't see major accumulations of glass, CRT glass here in California. That's our confidence in that is high. The report, I think, had indicated that there were some issues in California, but I think that they had received some poor information from somewhere. But we think that the national stockpiles are indicative of limited legitimate downstream options for this material, and California is on the forefront of acknowledging and addressing that challenge. In that regard, we've yet to publicly notice, but in June we expect to have a public workshop in order to engage on several different regulatory changes that we're looking to make, some of that including CRT glass, but as well as the designated approved collector portion of our regulations that engages with local government, cities and counties and districts in regard to the collection of material and documentation of those materials. You know, we see that as a potential vulnerability in the program. So if you're interested in any of that, stay tuned to the listserv, and we will be making that public notice soon. Any questions?
No, I was just going to say, you know, with the failure to report, maybe we can have an update next month, kind of, you know, how was that disposed? You know, where are we in the ones who haven't reported? Maybe in June we can kind of just get a quick update, like, okay, what, you know, who did we hear from, and you know, maybe we can kind of think about better ways of, you know, getting compliance. So that'd be great.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. And I'll just add that we have a tentative date of June 12th, but that could change for that regulatory workshop. So we'll get that information out as soon as that's nailed down.
Thank you. Thank you for the update. Nothing else on e-waste. I think we'll move to waste tire. Mark?
Thank you, Ken. And to be consistent with universal entropy, I wanted to recognize that we skipped an item back under solid waste facility permits. So if you don't mind, we'd like to update folks on a recent award for a cleanup program, and then have Lorraine come up and provide her tire enforcement update, which is number 1 under tire. And then again, in the interest of continuing entropy, if we could go to number 3 before number 2, that would be beneficial to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. I'm Wes Minderman with the Engineering Services Branch. I just have a quick information update regarding our solid waste disposal and co-disposal site cleanup grant program. On April 18th, we awarded our last grant for fiscal year 2012-2013 to the town of Apple Valley in the amount of $12,500. The grant money will be used to enhance their illegal dumping prevention program by allowing their code enforcement department to go around and proactively address illegal disposal sites throughout the town. So we're happy to provide that grant. That'll close out fiscal year 12-13. We awarded about just over $1 million in grants this year under the cleanup program. Looking forward to next fiscal year, we anticipate we'll have $2.5 million available to local jurisdictions to help clean up illegal disposal sites and legacy sites. And we anticipate that those deadlines for submittals will be August 1st, November 5th, and then February 4th of 2014. So that concludes my report. I'd be happy to answer any questions. Seeing none, thank you very much.
Good morning. My name is Lorraine Van Kekricks, and I'm with the Waste Evaluation and Enforcement Branch, and I'm here for a tire enforcement update. We inspect tire facilities for compliance with state minimum standards, and our reports are always in arrears because the reports are not due immediately, and we get them, they need to be scanned. So the most recent data is for November of 2012. And CalRecycle and our tire enforcement grantees completed 877 inspections. We are continuing to work on doing inspections for never inspected tire program identification numbers. And we have issued 4 streamlined penalty letters since the last public meeting. 2 are for manifesting violations and 2 are for late renewals. We did not issue any new cleanup and abatement orders since the last meeting. We did issue 1 administrative complaint to Sherman Donald Ray. We have 2 administrative complaint settlements or decisions that have occurred since the last public meeting. Freedom Tire was denied a waste tire facility permit. The permit application was denied for up to 3 years, and that goes from the application date of December 21, 2011 to approximately December 21, 2014. We also issued a administrative decision for Zacatecas Tire Service. We had a tire enforcement conference call on the 10th of May. We were again asked questions about the solid tires disposal at landfill, and as I reported at the last public meeting, we have a policy in place that CalRecycle can receive applications and review them on a case-by-case for disposal of solid rubber tires that are unable to be altered, and that's done on the case-by-case basis. We will be looking into a more comprehensive solution, but right now we're going with the case-by-case review. There were also questions raised about the provisions in proposed regulations that would streamline tire facility permits, and we were asked about the status. We are in the process of getting the needed approvals on the economic analysis that must be completed prior to sending those regulations to the Office of Administrative Law. We're at the second control agency, and we're hoping to hear back from them at any time. Once we get that, then we will be able to move the package to the Office of Administrative Law to request the start of the first 45-day comment period. There was also a question on legislation that's proposed in terms of tire broker reporting. There are bills that are addressing that issue, but the staff does not have a position on those bills at this point in time. So that concludes my tire enforcement report. I've also been asked to cover item number 3 in the tire world. We have approved a $100,000 augmentation of our contract with the California Highway Patrol. We have augmented the contract because while there's currently much less movement in export of tires overseas and illegal facilities and haulers hauling illegally related to that export, based on past experience, it's likely that export will resume at some point in time, and we want to have the maximum amount possible in place so that we can work with the California Highway Patrol when we need their services to address the illegal facilities and illegal hauling. And that concludes my tire report. Are there questions?
Lorraine, I just had one question. You mentioned the CHP contract. That was an augmentation. What's the total contract amount?
$500,000 with the augmentation.
Great, thank you. Very good. Mark? So,
I can affirm that is all of the items under the tire category.
the grant, the number 2?
Oh, for my portion.
Okay,
So,
very good.
thank you for the clarification. So I'll pass it on to my colleague,
All right. Dr. Levinson.
Levinson.
No chaos, only entropy.
Yes, only entropy, no chaos.
Okay, I'd like to announce this next item on the tire, in the tire section is regarding the Tire-Derived Aggregate Awards. And I have a number of other grant awards that I will get to later in the agenda. I'll try to keep those short because these generally are non-discretionary actions. In other words, the procedures for following criteria and applications have been adhered to, and so there's really no discretion, and that's why we make these as an announcement generally. But on this one, I just wanted to give a couple of details because it is a relatively new program, trying to look at market development for tire-derived aggregate, which is we think has a lot of potential, but has been a struggle, and we've done a lot of work in this area to try and promote it. So that the TDA grant program is really designed to promote the use of tire-derived aggregate as an alternative to the use of conventional aggregate in various civil engineering applications. And we discussed this program at the September 2012 monthly meeting, and there were a number of changes that were made in response to comments at that meeting, including adding private and for-profit entities as being eligible to receive grants, and also specifying that landfill-related projects would receive the lowest priority if the program was oversubscribed. So in this cycle, we got 5 applications requesting about a little over $700,000. This is good because it's an increase over the first cycle that we had, where we only had 2 applications. So that's positive. All of the 5 applications that we got are recommended for approval, or were approved. All of them were landfill related. 4 had to deal with landfill applications related to gas application or gas collection, and 1 was related to lightweight fill to construct a berm at a landfill. And these 5 projects will divert an estimated 2.1 million passenger tire equivalents. So it's pretty substantial amount of tires being diverted, but they are based at landfills. So those awards have been approved. It's delegated to me. And I wanted to use that as a segue to talk about another project that we're involved in. We frankly are disappointed that none of the grant applications were involved in non-landfill applications of TDA. So we continue to work on trying to expand that marketplace. And we have a pretty exciting high-profile project that is starting out with BART, Bay Area Rapid Transit. And in late April, our engineering staff dealing with tire-derived aggregate and one of our contractors met with BART's construction staff regarding the use of tire-derived aggregate in one of the new extensions that's currently under construction in the Fremont area. BART will be constructing about 1,500 linear feet of track that need to have vibration mitigation that meets various federal transportation requirements, and they've chosen tire-derived aggregate as the base for, or as the way to meet those vibration mitigation requirements. That's going to involve about 130,000 passenger tire equivalents for that 1,500-foot portion, and we're hoping obviously that that will spur further consideration by BART and other light rail projects to use TDA. So that's really good news. I think it can be credited a lot, I don't know if they're in here, but in part to Bob Fuji and Stacy and probably Albert and our contractor Joaquin Wright, who spread the word on that work. So congrats to you guys on that. Okay, then I'll just keep moving along if that's all right. We'll move into our local assistance category, where we have 2 very brief action items. The first is an application to expand the Los Angeles County Recycling Market Development Zone. And we're very pleased at this application. It would add, almost double the zone. It would add 8 new jurisdictions to the existing 11 jurisdictions that are already comprising the zone. And the zone program in general is really a key tool that we have to mesh our solid waste management needs with economic development needs, hoping to fuel new businesses and expand existing ones, and so on. So this is a partnership between local zone administrators and CalRecycle. It's been key to a lot of the things we've done in the past. So we're really pleased that the LA zone, the LA County zone, has chosen to expand its boundaries, and the application met all the requirements. So I've gone ahead, will go ahead and approve that, since that's delegated to me. Secondly, the second item in local assistance is an amended siting element for Yolo County. Yolo County amended its countywide siting element by removing the University of California Davis landfill, which ceased accepting solid waste in 2011 and is scheduled for final closure later this summer. Based on historical waste disposal and population projections, the solid waste disposal capacity in the county is estimated at about 80 years or so remaining. So there's plenty of capacity in that county. All the requirements of amending the countywide siting element were approved, or have been met. And that particular action is delegated to Kara Morgan, our branch chief, so we will go ahead and approve that and get that taken care of. Next, all these papers. Next is in section H is our awards for household hazardous waste grants, and I'm just going to make a very brief statement about those awards, but then we're going to segue right away to a presentation that's listed later in the agenda, but it's on prior household hazardous waste grants that involved extended producer responsibility principles and activities. So Heidi and Kimbra can get ready for that. It'll just be about a minute, ladies. So in terms of the HHW grant awards, I want to announce their approval for fiscal year 12-13. And this was a cycle that was a little different than previous cycles because we didn't have as much time as we normally did. And based on some of the stakeholder input that we got in various surveys, we kept this cycle focused on smaller projects and projects that could be completed in a relatively short time frame. So the maximum award was $50,000 for individual applicants and $75,000 for rural or regional applicants. We received 39 eligible applications that requested a total of $2.1 million. That was oversubscribed. We only had $1.5 million available. And with that $1.5 million, we could fully fund 32 of those applications and partially fund one other. So those have been approved. I wanted to announce that. But that is a perfect segue into our next presentation. So while Heidi and Kimbra are coming up, and do you want to use the podium, Heidi? Let me introduce this presentation. This prior cycle that I just talked about, the HHW 12-13 cycle, as I said, was pretty narrowly focused. But we are looking at our next household hazardous waste cycles to probably expand it back out to a larger context, more kinds of projects being eligible. And in the interest of having that conversation about what that next cycle should look at, we're conducting a number of different activities. One is to have Heidi and Kimbra give a presentation on past household hazardous waste grants that involved an extended producer responsibility component. And the other is to have a workshop in the fall to solicit even more stakeholder input on the criteria that we should use for the 13-14 household hazardous waste cycle. So clearly, extended producer responsibility is an area of very key interest to CalRecycle. It's a key component of a lot of our activities and policy discussions. There are many bills in the legislature, as Graciela briefly described earlier. And one of the